Chapter 9. There's more than one form of opportunity. Opportunities are created from circumstances. Sun Tzu wrote about using fire on his enemies. For a fire offensive to be effective, it must be a dry, hot, and windy day. It needs to be dry so the fire will burn violently. And it needs to be windy for the fire to spread, otherwise the damage will be minimal. For a fire plan to be effective, a leader must wait for a day with these conditions. They have to wait for the right opportunity. But we don't always have the luxury of waiting. We can't always expect there to be an opportunity. There will be highs, lows, and everything in between. Sure, we must be ready to recognize the window of opportunity when it opens, but bloody hell, we also have to be prepared to create the opportunities we need by ourselves if we have to. Personally, this is something I've always struggled with. Sometimes I get stuck in the realm of have-nots, and it's difficult to get out. It's tempting to complain about the lack of opportunities, like how I wasn't born in the right country, how I wasn't raised with a father, or how I'm overly timid and shy. It's easier for me to complain about what I don't have than it is to figure out how I can create opportunities despite everything. Unfortunately, time won't wait for us, thus we should not wait for time either. We can choose to take an active role in shaping the situation. Instead of complaining, we could try to pivot, influence people, or bring on a sense of urgency in others. Life is a game that we must learn how to play while we're playing it. But it's a game that's designed to be played with openness and a light-hearted spirit. Life is filled with wonderful surprises that magically show up from time to time. Life shouldn't feel heavy. Writers, for instance, always have a look of concern as they desperately try to come up with new ideas. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, seem to always believe that the next big idea is out there, floating around in the ether, patiently waiting for them to grab hold of it and write it down. The former mentality feels difficult and challenging, while the latter feels light and easy. You get to choose what attitude you choose to approach life with. Imagine a young child on a hunt, learning to lay a bird trap for the first time. They build and set the trap, eagerly awaiting their victim to fall into it. With one hand, they hold a piece of string, ready to yank it as quickly as they can when the moment comes. They know they can't act too early or too late. If they are skittish and set the trap off prematurely, the trap will miss its mark. But if they act too slowly, the prey will run free. Feels exciting, doesn't it? Would you believe me if I told you that this feeling is always available to us, as long as we're willing to tap into it? Bring back that spirit of when you were a kid, because this is exactly what our lives should feel like. Life should feel like we're constantly at that moment of peak opportunity. And I'm not talking nonsense. There's good reason for it. Opportunities constantly open and close as circumstances change. Opportunities aren't solid, fixed objects that can be handled or touched. They're not gifts that are placed on our doorstep with us passively waiting for it to arrive. Sun Tzu had a more multidimensional way of thinking about opportunities. He saw opportunities from 4 dimensions: opportunities from insight, opportunities from patience, opportunities from action, and opportunities from imagination. Opportunities aren't binary. It wasn't a matter of either having opportunity or not having it. Opportunities from insight. Opportunities that came from having some unique knowledge or insight are the opportunities that people recognize the most. We know that opportunities can come from being able to see things that others don't, from having information that others don't, or in Sun Tzu's case, having a deeper understanding of the situation than others. We compete, pay, and sometimes even cheat to gain a tiniest bit of knowledge for that competitive edge. Unfortunately, this is also a common reason why people believe that they don't have any opportunities in their life, because they don't believe they have any unique insights. This is the curse of knowledge at play, where you assume, incorrectly, that because something is obvious to you, it's also common knowledge to others. The Battle of Guandu. The Battle of Guandu was a famous battle between Keokayo and Yuanshao that happened a couple of decades before the Three Kingdoms period. Keokayo had his work cut out for him because at the height of the battle, Yuanshao had up to 110,000 troops, 4 to 5 times more than Kaiokaio's army. The two warlords were locked in battle for months, and although Kaiokaio had managed to secure some early victories, he was still vastly outnumbered and constantly wanted to give up fighting. Kaiokaio wrote a letter to a close friend asking him whether he should retreat. His friend replied, "My friend and general, let me help you answer that question by first dissecting the current situation. Both you and Yuan Shao have most of your armies tied up at Guandu, so it is indeed a very decisive battle, but that is what also creates the greatest opportunity. If you lose, make no mistake, you will surely die. Painfully, but if you can turn the tables on him, it will be a grand victory. Is it worth the risk? Well, that depends on how you look at the opportunity." His friend continued, "Although Yuan Shao's army far outnumbers yours, that is not the deciding factor. The critical factor is whether he can use the resources he has at his disposal effectively. You and I both know that Yuan Shao is totally incapable of maneuvering troops. He is no match for you. So even though you appear to be weak and Yuan Shao strong, the distance between you two is not as great as you think. If Yuan Shao were as strong as you imagine," his friend reasoned, "then you would not have won those earlier skirmishes, and he would have eliminated you by now. The fact that you have resisted and survived, and the fact that you are writing me this letter, tells me that the situation is not as dire as you think. It is not only the sheer number of troops that is important, it is also the ability of the commander." His friend's recommendation was stern and clear. Now, because you have already resisted for so long, there will surely be a change in the situation soon. Time creates change. Even if you do not change, the enemy will surely change. He will be unable to resist you if you persist with the constant pressure and discipline. You must not retreat at all costs. Because of this letter, Kaiokaio decided against retreating and continued to fight. Kaiokaio eventually defeated Yuan Shao, and the battle marked the beginning of Kaiokaio's ascension to power. Did Kaiokaio's friend give him any unique secrets or knowledge? Objectively speaking, probably not. But to Kaiokaio it was, because he couldn't see the forest for the trees. You don't have the luxury of waiting for success to come by chance. This is especially true when you're leading other people and teams. Your team depends on you. You owe it to them to be clear on where they're going and what's coming up next. And to be honest, you will probably feel incredibly lonely. It will feel like the burden is entirely yours to bear. It will feel like other people don't quite understand the way you think or how you feel. Therefore, unlike Kaiokaio, desperately asking his friend for advice, a better bet is to start building your own insights, thinking, and wisdom from today. Don't get used to relying on others and don't give up too easily. Invest the time to figure out how events are connected from your vantage point. Think about all the possible steps available. Look beneath the surface and find those hidden forces driving change. Opportunities from patience. I'll admit that I'm somewhat of a self-improvement fanatic. My collection of motivational books is larger than what a normal person should have in a tiny New York apartment. I have so little space now that they're just stacked in towers on top of each other in the corner of my bedroom. Most of these books talk about the success that will come from being well prepared. We need to make goals and make sure we're taking daily steps to move forward toward those goals. But have you thought about why we spend all this effort on preparation? What exactly are we preparing for? Some might say that we are preparing for life's unexpected events. We're fully prepared beforehand, so when that door opens in front of us, we're ready to walk through it any time. Which is true, but Sun Tzu puts it a bit more bluntly. We want to be prepared and waiting for others to make a mistake. It may sound harsh, but Sun Tzu believed that success came from the mistakes of others, the mistakes from their overreaction, the mistakes from their poor decisions, the mistakes from their inaction. Our chance for victory lies entirely with the enemy, he said. Hence the biggest opportunities were opportunities that came from being patient. Sun Tzu believed that we should continuously work on strengthening our position and foundation. If we had a strong foundation, we would be the ones in control of when we made our move. We can't control what other people do, and we can't force them to make mistakes. We also shouldn't try to force them into doing something through brute force or will, because going against them head-to-head is always a recipe for wasted energy and risk. We instead need to be patient and ready to act when the opportunity and mistake presents itself. Being hasty would only squander our previous investment and effort. This is more difficult than it seems. We are hardwired to think that we need to act to create opportunities, that we need to act to force change. But we forget that all actions have consequences, and in Sun Tzu's time, those consequences meant the difference between life and death. However, patience didn't mean resting on our laurels. It meant making the most of every spare moment we had to prepare. Because while we're waiting for an enemy to make a mistake, they're also waiting for us to make a mistake. Now, allow me to finish the quote from earlier. Our chance for victory lies entirely with the enemy, but our failure lies entirely with us. We must not give others the opportunity to go on the offensive. Whether someone attacks you or not is not the point. The point is whether you have sufficiently prepared for an attack. The point is whether your foundation is strong enough to resist an attack. General Zheng Guofan said, "We should not care about whether the enemy is strong or weak. The most important thing is that we are clear of our own strengths and weaknesses." Shu Sun Tong patiently waits. Shu Sun Tong was an official in the Qin dynasty who was particularly known for being able to grasp the motivations and desires of others. At the time, the Qin dynasty was under siege from the constant rebellions that had erupted across the nation. All day I hear about conflict. Never-ending conflict. When will it end? Not a day goes by without news of another uprising, complained the emperor. The emperor was under a lot of strain, and he was constantly being told that the war was an omen of the demise of the dynasty. Shu Sun Tong thought that it was quite odd to be constantly telling the emperor about bad news, so he told him what he wanted to hear. Although there are many rebellions, the roots of our dynasty are still strong. There is no way these rebellions would be able to upheave our dynasty. And it worked. From then on, the emperor would only listen to Shu Sun Tong. He frequently rewarded Shu Sun Tong with gold and gifts for his counsel. Unfortunately, Shu Sun Tong did not believe his own words, and he eventually fled with his gold and his disciples. He found his way to the court of Lu Bang, and there he tried using the same technique as before. When Lu Bang said west, he would also say west. When Lu Bang said east, he would nod in agreement. This was what he did best. He was so successful that he again began to earn the trust of the Lu Bang, who would often go to Shu Sun Tong for advice and recommendations on who should be promoted or be given official roles. Oddly, Shu Sun Tong would never recommend one of his own disciplines for a role, despite having many opportunities to do so. Eventually, his disciples started to ask why. "Teacher, many times you have had the opportunity to recommend one of us to the emperor, yet you refuse to do so. Why? Are we not worthy of serving him? What are you all complaining about? We are at war. You are all students of pen and paper. Do you know anything about battles and wars?" His students were unsatisfied with this answer, but did not press him any further. A few years later, Lu Bang succeeded in defeating the other kingdoms and pronounced himself the emperor of all of China. But now, Lu Bang had a different problem. He was worried about not being seen and treated as a proper emperor. He knew that his empire was won through the blood, sweat, and tears of his friends, not because of his outstanding leadership or command. So when he became the emperor, his friends and followers continued to treat each other as brothers and comrades. They treated Lu Bang like an old pal, just as they did before. Shu Sun Tong knew that Lu Bang desired more. He suggested to Lu Bang that he should establish a new court etiquette. Each morning, before the court was in session, all the ministers and officials had to line up in 2 orderly rows according to their level of seniority and weight. Only after they were in position would Lu Bang enter the room. And once Lu Bang was seated, the officials would all bow to him as a sign of respect. Similarly, at the end of the session, Lu Bang would be the first to leave before anyone else could leave. After the first session, with this new rule, Lu Bang returned with a large grin, the happiest he had been for a while. He said to Shu Sun Tong, "Only after this morning did I truly discover the pleasures of being an emperor. I have never, after all these years, experienced as much joy as I did today. Seeing his opportunity, Sun Tzu suggested to the emperor that he should keep the momentum to solidify his influence on the court. He recommended that all 500 of his students be given official positions in the court to assist him, and the emperor agreed without hesitation. Sun Tzu's patience created the biggest window of opportunity for him and his students. His patience allowed him to gain more than he could have before. Confucius said, one should not worry about whether or not they have a seat at the table. What they should be worrying about is, once that seat is given to them, will they be able to fulfill the expectations and responsibilities? Because once those opportunities come, they will not be given a second chance. Not having enough patience is one of humankind's most common but easily avoidable faults. Opportunities from action. My Buddhist teacher used to say that the wisest people were those who knew how to steal. Back then, I thought, what an odd thing to say. We're supposed to be creating better versions of ourselves. Why would stealing have any part to play in it? But now I am beginning to understand what he meant. When we steal money and other material objects, we're being simple, little thieves. Our world is small, but if we learn how to steal the opportunities that open unexpectedly in front of us, it makes us wise and our world expansive. Opportunities from action are opportunities that come from acting when the time is right. They come from being able to capitalize on change. Recognizing the opportunity is one thing, but taking action or having the ability to take action is something else. The Battle of Red Cliffs. The Battle of Red Cliffs was a battle fought on the Yangtze River between the allied forces of Liu Bei and Sun Quan against Kaokaio's larger forces. Because Kaokaio's army was from the north, they weren't used to fighting and living on boats for extended periods of time. Kaokaio ordered his ships to be chained together from stern to stern to help reduce the seasickness of his army. As he was doing this, one of his generals asked, "Isn't this dangerous and too risky? If we tie all our ships together, they will burn if the enemy uses fire against us." Kaokaio calmly responded, "You need to be clear that it is winter now, and in the winter the wind blows away from us to the south. If they try to use fire against us, they will burn their own ships and not ours." After a few weeks, the winds unexpectedly changed direction and started blowing from the south to north toward Kaokaio's ships. Kaokaio's generals again asked him, "My lord, today the winds have changed." "We need to be particularly careful in case the enemy chooses to attack us with fire." Kaokaio again calmly replied, "This is normal for this time of the year. It happens every year. We don't need to be alarmed because it typically lasts for only half a day." But half a day was all the Allied forces needed. Later that day, Kaokaio's 300 ships were set completely ablaze. The Allied forces used that half a day's window to go on the offensive, exploiting the enemy's mistake of inaction. When the opportunity comes, we need to be ready to act immediately. The Allied forces under Liu Bei saw the window of opportunity and acted before it closed. However, please don't take action as a synonym for going on the offensive. Playing defense can also be a form of action if that's what the situation requires. We don't always have to respond to the aggression of others. If we're well prepared, we are the ones who decide whether we want to engage. Kaokaio knew that the winds had changed, but he dismissed the information and chose not to do anything about it. If he had chosen to act defensively instead of being overconfident and doing nothing, he might have created his own opportunities because he would have tossed their fire strategy out the window. Information and knowledge in itself is not enough to be useful. It requires our wisdom and craftsmanship to transmute them into an opportunity. Both sides saw the same small half-day window, but they chose to respond differently. Opportunities from imagination. What I admire most about Sun Tzu is the strength of his belief that there's always another way. Time and time again, he comes back to the view that life is unpredictable. It can end and begin anywhere. When we're patient and the opportunity doesn't come, or when the opportunity comes and we're not ready for it, or when we don't have enough insight to see the opportunity in the first place, when all else fails, well then, we're just going to have to rely on ourselves to create another opportunity. No matter how bad the circumstances may seem, and no matter how strong our opponent might appear to be, we must always believe that there's still a way to success. We just have to find a path to get there. We can change reality if we have enough of a vision and imagination for how things could be different. The Battle of Fei River. The Battle of Fei River is one of those classic Chinese battles that has been retold countless times because of the extraordinary odds involved. It was a battle between the numerically inferior Eastern Jin dynasty and the state of former Qin. In November 383 A.D., the 80,000-strong Qin army and the 30,000-strong Jin army were positioned on opposite sides of the Fei River, Qin on the west bank and Jin on the east side. The armies were itching to fight, but they could not get at each other, as neither army wanted to risk marching across the river and getting attacked while crossing. The Jin army sent a messenger to Qin saying, "We are both stuck here on different sides of the river, which benefits neither of us. We have travelled so far to get here, and drawing out a battle would not be advantageous. Let's have a fast and decisive battle. Move your army 30 miles westward away from the river so our army may cross. Then we can fight freely in a glorious battle." Most of the commanders in the Qin army opposed this suggestion, but the Qin ruler overruled them. "This is a great idea. Once their army is halfway across the water, I will simply turn my troops around to attack them. We will easily be able to eliminate them while half of their army is still stuck in the water." Unfortunately, what was lost on the Qin ruler was that he had a much larger army, and he wouldn't be able to maneuver as quickly as the enemy. The Qin army was ordered to turn around, and they started to march away from the river. Due to the army size, the army marched at different speeds, as the command was not received by all sections at the same time. In a large army, orders are given by sending messengers back and forth between different sections of the army. As the Qin army began its slow move westward, some of Jin's spies began to provoke panic. They shouted, "We've lost the battle! We're retreating before we have even started fighting." The rear sections of the army, who had not received the order yet, became confused because they saw shapes moving away from the river where they thought the main fighting was going to be. The spies continued their treachery. As the Jin army started to engage Qin soldiers at the riverbank, the spies shouted, "We have been defeated! It's over!" This time, the troops were even more confused. They were told to march away from the river, but now it looked as if the battle had begun. What was going on? The lies were becoming more and more true in the eyes of the soldiers, and they were tempted to flee, fearing being left behind. With a bit more encouragement from the spies, panic broke out, and it spread like wildfire. Chaos caused all sides to rout beyond the control of the commanders. Jin managed to change its fate with a much smaller army, and they did it through creativity and ingenuity, not through brute strength and force. If they had tried fighting the Qin army head-on, they would have lost dramatically. Jin commanders created their own opportunity by placing themselves in the shoes of the soldiers. They empathized with how soldiers in different sections of a large army would think and behave, and they used it to their advantage. Zhuge borrows 10,000 arrows. A classic story in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms period tells of Zhuge using straw boats to borrow arrows from the enemy. Zhuge allied army was preparing for combat, but was short 10,000 arrows. His peers, jealous of his wisdom, challenged, "If you are as wise as you say you are, then you will get those 10,000 arrows for us before the battle in 3 days. If you can't, then you should be executed." Zhuge, nicknamed the Sleeping Dragon, agreed without hesitation. Of course, waiting until the third and final day, Zhuge prepared 20 large boats and sailed them toward the enemy camp across the river. He ordered the sailors to loudly beat drums and shout orders as if they were about to attack. The enemy troops rushed out to engage them, but they couldn't see the location of the boats due to the morning fog, and they didn't want to get too close to the boats in case it was a trap. They fired volleys and volleys of arrows at shadowy figures in the direction of the drums, certain that they would hit the men on the boats. But they didn't know that there were no men on the boats. The arrows they were firing were getting stuck on the hundreds of straw men that were tied to the decks of the boats. By the time the fog cleared, Zagelian had returned to camp with his treasure, having borrowed more than 10,000 arrows from the enemy. Zagelian said, "A leader who doesn't know the way of the heavens and the earth, the way of the yin and yang and the way of traps, is a foolish man." The way of traps was being able to use your wisdom to steal opportunities. On the surface, this might seem like the lowest form of opportunity, the undesirable kind you only look for when all the other types of opportunities aren't there. But you would be wrong. It's the most important type of opportunity because it places matters directly into your hands. Change your fate by always having a vision. Imagine the potential you could unlock if you were always actively looking and searching for that opening because you truly believed that opportunities were everywhere. To me, this is the most empowering perspective because we have complete and total accountability for our future. In the end, it's just about creativity, and trust me, you have that in spades.